This issue, we'll be diving into a marvelous popular science masterpiece, a short history of nearly everything. The human journey to understand the natural world has been filled with twists and hardships. Despite centuries of effort, the vast expanse of nature still holds countless unsolved mysteries. As its title suggests, A Short History of Nearly Everything is an all-encompassing book that covers an incredibly wide range of subjects. So, what sets this book apart from other popular science reads? Perhaps you've had this experience. You eagerly pick up a book, excited to learn about a topic, only to find it filled with obscure jargon and complex formulas. The content you're actually interested in is either missing or completely incomprehensible, and you ultimately close the book in disappointment. It's a frustration not just felt by us, but one the author, Bill Bryson, knew all too well. In his introduction, he recalls seeing a cross-section of the Earth in a science book. The diagram explained that the Earth's core is a sphere of hot iron and nickel, and we are living on just a thin outer crust. Bryson was instantly captivated, wondering how scientists could possibly know the internal structure of the planet. Yet, as he searched the book for answers, all he found was impenetrable terminology. Bryson joked that it was as if these authors were deliberately making science esoteric to guard its secrets, unwilling to share them with outsiders. While a witty remark, this very experience became the motivation for Bill Bryson to write a short history of nearly everything. Before undertaking this project, Bryson was already a celebrated travel writer in the West, known for his best-selling literature and as a frequent contributor to top publications like the New York Times and the Times. His work is defined by its humorous style and witty asides, which have earned him a beloved readership. A Short History of Nearly Everything was Bryson's first foray into popular science and a challenge he set for himself. "I wanted to see," he said, "if it is possible to write a book that is accessible to the average person without sacrificing intellectual depth, a book that allows anyone to appreciate the wonder and miracles of science." To achieve this goal, Bryson spent 3 years poring over vast amounts of material and interviewing experts across numerous fields. The result is a short history of nearly everything. The book maintains his signature humorous and witty prose, weaving fascinating scientific anecdotes and gossip into the hard science, making a cold subject feel warm and approachable. It was not only named one of the best science books of the year by the journal Science, but also won the Aventis Prize, an award once claimed by Stephen Hawking. This demonstrates that it won not only the hearts of general readers but also the high praise of professionals. In the introduction, Bryson emphasizes that he was curious not just about the answers to scientific questions, but also about how scientists found those answers. Following his lead, we will select 3 of the book's most representative subjects: the Earth, life, and humanity, to see how much scientists truly understand about them and what stories unfolded along their paths of discovery. First, the first question: how did scientists measure the size and age of the Earth? Next, the second question: what do we really know about life? Finally, we'll explore: how have humans studied their own history? Let's begin with the first question. How did scientists measure the size and age of the Earth? In 1735, the French Academy of Sciences dispatched an expedition to Peru with the critical mission of measuring the size of the Earth. Their task was to traverse the treacherous Andes Mountains to precisely measure the length of 1 degree of longitude. With this number, they could multiply by 360 to calculate the Earth's circumference. However, as Bryson tells it, this French expedition may have been the most ill-fated in history. They journeyed nearly halfway across the globe just to get from France to Peru. No sooner had they arrived than the team angered the locals and were chased out of town with stones. One of their doctors was murdered, a botanist went mad, and several men died of strange, high-fever illnesses. To top it off, the expedition's third-in-command eloped with a 13-year-old local girl and refused all pleas to return. It seemed that nearly every misfortune imaginable befell this team. Why did this happen? A major reason was their complete inability to gain the trust of the local people. Imagine a group of foreigners traveling halfway around the world to your doorstep claiming, "We just want to measure the size of the Earth." You'd probably find it hard to believe, too. So, the question is, why did this French team have to go all the way to Peru to measure a degree of longitude? Couldn't they have done it in France? As it turns out, they couldn't. The reason involves the evolution of humanity's understanding of the Earth's shape. In fact, before they even set out, scientists already had a rough idea of the Earth's size. In the 17th century, an English mathematician spent 2 years traveling from London north to York with only a ruler and chains, measuring a degree of longitude to be 110.72 kilometers, an astonishingly accurate figure, off by less than 550 meters from today's precise measurements. Shortly after, the French astronomer Jean Picard, using more advanced tools like telescopes and pendulum clocks, refined this number to 110.46 kilometers, an even smaller margin of error. This figure was a point of French pride. Why, then, were the French now going to such great lengths to go to Peru? You can thank Isaac Newton for that. In the late 17th century, Newton published his Principia, which introduced the revolutionary law of universal gravitation. This law not only explained many phenomena on Earth but also overturned numerous long-held beliefs. One of these was that the Earth was not a perfect sphere, but a slightly flattened spheroid. According to Newton's law, the centrifugal force from the Earth's rotation would cause it to be slightly squashed at the poles and bulge at the equator. If this were true, a degree of longitude near the poles would not be the same length as one near the equator, rendering all previous measurements meaningless. To verify whether the Earth was indeed oblate, the expedition had to travel to a distant land. At the same time, they were fiercely motivated to prove Newton wrong and defend France's honor in the field of longitude measurement. The expedition trekked through mountains and overcame immense difficulties, persevering in a barren land for 9.5 years. However, just as they were about to complete their mission, news arrived. Another team, sent only to the much closer Scandinavia near the North Pole, had already finished their measurements. They had confirmed that a degree of longitude was indeed longer near the poles. Newton was right. The Earth was flat at the poles. In the end, the unluckiest expedition spent nearly a decade to arrive at a conclusion they didn't want, only to have someone else publish it first. Their luck had truly run out. While measuring the Earth's size was arduous, the principle was relatively simple. Measuring its age, by contrast, was far more complex. Age cannot be seen or touched, so how did scientists even begin? Initially, determining the Earth's age was mostly guesswork. The most famous attempt occurred in 1650, when an archbishop named James Ussher, by studying the Bible and other documents, concluded that the Earth was created at noon on October 23, 4004 BC. The date was so precise it was astounding, but it was obviously wrong and later became a running joke. For a long time, however, Ussher's view dominated the scientific community, and people widely believed the Earth was very young. After Ussher, the scientist Edmund Halley proposed a more scientific method. Halley believed the salt in the oceans had accumulated gradually. By dividing the total amount of salt in the oceans by the amount added each year, one could calculate the Earth's age. Although this method had many uncertainties, someone attempted the calculation and came up with a figure of 89 million years. Others suggested using heat dissipation. It was known that the Earth was constantly releasing heat, so the thinking went that if we knew the rate of heat loss, we could calculate how long it took for the Earth to cool to its current temperature. A French scientist named Buffon did just that. He heated iron spheres until they were scorching hot and then timed how long they took to cool, reportedly by touching them to estimate the rate of heat loss. He concluded the Earth's age was between 75,000 and 168,000 years. As you can tell, while these methods were creative, none were particularly reliable. By the end of the 19th century, estimates of the Earth's age from different scientists ranged from a few million to several billion years, with no one able to provide conclusive proof. It wasn't until the 20th century that scientists finally found a precise method for measuring the Earth's age. This method came not from geology or paleontology, but from physics, radioactive decay. In 1903, Marie Curie won the Nobel Prize for her discovery of radioactive elements. Soon after, the renowned physicist Ernest Rutherford discovered that all radioactive materials have a constant property. Over a certain period, a portion of the atoms in the material will decay into another type of atom. This rate of change is incredibly stable, making it ideal for dating materials. Rutherford tested a piece of ore and found it to be 700 million years old, far exceeding the mainstream view of the Earth's age at the time. Building on this discovery, by the mid-20th century, humanity finally obtained an accurate age for the Earth. Scientists tirelessly searched for the oldest rock samples, placing them in sterile laboratories for repeated testing. They ultimately concluded that the Earth is 4.55 billion years old, with a margin of error of about 70 million years. After centuries of relentless effort, humanity had finally solved the mystery of the Earth's age. To summarize, measuring the Earth's size was a monumental task. Countless expeditions traveled the globe to determine its dimensions and shape, a process marked by fierce debate over whether it was a perfect sphere or an oblate spheroid. Measuring its age was even more difficult. Early methods were often fanciful and their conclusions unreliable. It was only after the discovery of radioactive decay that humanity could accurately calculate the Earth's long history of approximately 4.6 billion years. We've just covered how scientists came to understand our planet. For our second question, let's look at what scientists know about life on Earth. How did they acquire this knowledge? We often hear about biologists discovering a fossil in some remote location, advancing a field of study by a huge leap. Indeed, our current understanding of ancient life relies heavily on fossils, and the process of their discovery is often full of drama. In 1909, paleontologist Charles Walcott and his wife were riding horses on a mountain trail in Canada. Suddenly, his wife fell from her horse. As Walcott rushed to help her, he stumbled upon an extremely rare animal fossil at his feet. He returned the following year and was stunned to discover that an area near the summit, as large as a city block, contained a massive trove of fossils dating back 500 million years to the Cambrian period. This place is the famous Burgess Shale, hailed as the Holy Grail of Paleontology. Why such a title? According to paleontologist Stephen Jay Gould, the Burgess Shale is the only place that gives us a complete picture of the origin of modern life. 500 million years ago, during the Cambrian period, the Earth was teeming with animals, but most were soft-bodied and rarely formed fossils. The Burgess Shale, however, was located in a shallow sea at the base of a cliff. When the cliff collapsed, mudslides instantly buried these soft creatures, preserving all their features perfectly, much like pressing a flower in a book. The luck was simply incredible. For a long time, Walcott had almost exclusive access to these fossils. With such a unique treasure, he could have made a legendary name for himself. Unfortunately, his analysis of the fossils was completely wrong. He tried to fit them into modern biological classifications, declaring one fossil the ancestor of worms and another the ancestor of jellyfish. This was wishful thinking. We now know that the essence of evolution is random genetic mutation. There is no fixed path from lower to higher forms of life. After Walcott's death, the fossils were gradually forgotten. It wasn't until nearly 50 years later that other scholars re-examined them, and the results were astounding. They found that the biological structures in these fossils were bizarre, with many being unlike anything seen before or since. How strange were they? Today, we classify life into kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. Phylum is a very high-level category, just below kingdom. Among the Burgess Shale fossils, 15 to 20 species could not be placed in any known biological phylum, a true miracle. Based on this evidence, some scholars propose that the Cambrian period, 500 million years ago, was an era of explosive life, famously known as the Cambrian Explosion. That is, after more than 4 billion years of slow evolution, a vast number of complex organisms suddenly appeared within a relatively short span of about 10 million years. Biologist Stephen Jay Gould described the Cambrian as a time filled with evolutionary experiments and trial and error, making today's evolution seem like mere tinkering. Gould's theory sounds plausible, but many scholars, including Richard Dawkins, author of The Selfish Gene, disagree. For example, decades after Walcott's discovery of the Burgess Shale, another lucky individual, while prospecting for minerals, stumbled upon another set of even older but equally astonishing fossils elsewhere in Canada. This new find meant that complex life had appeared at least 100 million years before the Cambrian period, making the Cambrian Explosion seem less special. Later, a re-evaluation of the Burgess Shale fossils revealed that they might not be as bizarre as initially thought. For instance, a creature called hallucigenia was once thought to walk on stilt-like legs. It was later discovered that this was a mistake made during fossil reconstruction. Those legs were actually spines on its back. Another animal that looked like a pineapple was eventually shown not to be an independent organism at all, but part of some other animal's body. It now seems the Burgess Shale fossils are not so mysterious after all. The so-called Cambrian Explosion was likely just a period when previously tiny organisms suddenly grew larger, making them more likely to form fossils and creating the appearance of a species boom. After recounting this winding history of research, Bill Bryson laments how incredibly difficult it is to reconstruct the forms and relationships of ancient creatures based on such a small amount of distorted, fragmented fossil evidence. You might think that while studying ancient life is hard, we must have a decent grasp of modern life. Unfortunately, for the vast majority of life on Earth, we have barely scratched the surface. Let's look at some numbers cited by Bill Bryson. The Economist once reported that humans have yet to identify 97% of the world's plant and animal species. Of all known species, over 99% have nothing more than a simple name and description. Beyond that, we know nothing about them. We don't even know how many species exist on Earth, with estimates ranging wildly from 3 million to 200 million. This is mainly because the richness of life on Earth far exceeds our imagination. For example, in 1982, a scientist in the Amazon rainforest sprayed insecticide on 19 trees and cataloged all the creatures that fell. He found approximately 1,200 species of beetles on those 19 trees alone. Extrapolating from this, there could be as many as 30 million insect species on Earth. And that's just the life we can see with the naked eye. Microorganisms like bacteria are even more staggering in number. In the 1980s, two scientists took a 1-gram soil sample from a forest near their lab and discovered between 4,000 and 5,000 different species of bacteria, more than were listed in the most comprehensive bacteriology manual at the time. Imagine how many different kinds of bacteria exist on the entire planet. What's more frustrating is that our existing system of biological knowledge is quite chaotic. Bryson gives the example of certain grass species that have been discovered and named at least 20 different times because different discoverers each thought they had found a new species. A book called The Manual of the Grasses of the United States took over 200 pages just to sort out these synonyms, and that was just for the grasses in one country. Currently, there are only about 10,000 active taxonomists worldwide responsible for classifying all species, a number that is clearly far from enough. As one biologist humorously put it, what we are facing is not so much a biodiversity crisis as a taxonomist crisis. To recap this section, our knowledge of ancient life depends heavily on fossils. However, the formation and discovery of fossils are fraught with chance, and interpretations of fragmented fossil records are often wrong. As for existing life on Earth, our understanding is equally lacking. We are not only unsure of the total number of species, but we also face a huge challenge in establishing a clear classification system for them. The first two questions covered the Earth itself and the exploration of life. Now for the third question, let's talk about ourselves. How much do we really know about human history, and how do we know it? As mentioned, becoming a fossil is hard. Just how hard? Bill Bryson gives a vivid explanation. First, an organism has to die in exactly the right place, since only 15% of rocks can preserve fossils. It must be buried quickly by sediment, decay in an oxygen-free environment, then survive countless geological shifts without its bones being crushed or deformed. Finally, after millions or even hundreds of millions of years, it has to be discovered by a human who recognizes it as a treasure worth preserving. How low are the odds? It's estimated that only 1 bone in a billion ever becomes a fossil. By that ratio, even with over 7 billion people on Earth today, each with 206 bones, we would only leave behind a little over 1,000 bone fossils. And whether those would ever be found is another matter entirely. Bryson points out that our entire understanding of prehistoric humanity is built upon the remains of only about 5,000 fragmented skeletons. To put that into perspective, you could fit all of these fossils into the back of a small pickup truck. What's more heartbreaking is that many of these precious fossils have been destroyed by humans themselves. This is not an isolated incident. In the Solo River region of Indonesia, an archaeologist once hired locals to excavate fossils, promising to pay 10 cents for each piece they found. He later discovered, to his dismay, that to make more money, the locals were breaking complete fossils into fragments to sell to him. You can imagine how difficult it is to piece together the complete story of human history from such a fragmented fossil record. Even when we have a fossil, it's hard to be certain which hominid species it belongs to, whether it was male or female. Therefore, much of what we think we know about human history involves a great deal of speculation. For example, biologists once discovered 2 sets of ancient hominid footprints in Africa. Based on these tracks, the American Museum of Natural History created a diorama of a pair of Australopithecines, reconstructing the scene. A hairy male with his arm around a hairy female, walking side by side across the African landscape. Their bodies are gorilla-like, but their faces and gait are distinctly human. Most people who see this display assume it's a scientifically validated scene. In reality, nearly every detail is a product of imagination. The length of their hair, the shape of their features, their facial expressions, and even their skin color are all conjectures. The female could have been a child, and the 2 might not have been a couple at all. We only call them Australopithecus because we don't know what else to call them. In truth, we can't even be sure which species they belong to. You might be thinking that relying on fossils is too difficult, but don't we have high-tech genetic tools? Surely they can tell us something. Indeed, scientists are now increasingly using genetics, particularly a substance called mitochondrial DNA, to study human history. Mitochondrial DNA is passed down only through the maternal line and has a relatively high mutation rate, making it very useful for tracing humanity's genetic history. The problem is, genetic research hasn't completely solved the mysteries of human history either. For instance, there are 2 main theories explaining human origins. One is the multiregional hypothesis, which suggests that ancient hominids like Neanderthals and Homo erectus are all common ancestors of modern humans, having evolved in different parts of a world and intermingling to eventually form modern Homo sapiens. The other is the out-of-Africa theory, which posits that modern humans emerged in Africa around 200,000 years ago, then migrated out to the rest of the world, replacing other hominids and evolving into the people we are today. Currently, the out-of-Africa theory is the dominant one, suggesting all modern humans originated in Africa. The main evidence for this comes from genetics. In 1997, scientists at the University of Munich successfully extracted Neanderthal DNA from a fossil and found no connection to the DNA of modern humans. This seemed to indicate that Neanderthals were not our ancestors and had gone extinct, dealing a heavy blow to the multiregional hypothesis. In 2000, Swedish scientists studied the mitochondrial DNA of a group of people and proposed that all modern humans descended from a small population of no more than 10,000 individuals in Africa about 100,000 years ago. Many similar studies have largely supported the out-of-Africa theory. However, the question of human origins is still not settled. There are genetic studies that don't support the out-of-Africa theory. For example, Rosalind Harding, a scholar at Oxford University, studied the human hemoglobin gene and found a variant that is common in Asian and Australian Aboriginal populations but completely absent in Africans. This gene arose in East Asia 200,000 years ago, at a time when modern Homo sapiens had not yet arrived there. This suggests that the ancestors of modern Asians may not have all come from that one group in Africa. Bill Bryson, intensely curious about this, went to ask Harding about it. Her answer was both direct and humorous. "I don't know." In her view, genetic research generally supports the theory of human origins in Africa. It's probably 95% correct, but there are always exceptions. And geneticists, she noted, often intentionally or unintentionally overlook these special cases. Thus, the question of human origins remains unresolved. Using genetics to study human history is certainly more reliable than relying solely on fossils, but this method also has its critics. Some argue that the ancient DNA we extract is likely contaminated and could even be misleading. An article in the journal Nature once told of a biologist asking a colleague, "Has that ancient human skull you're holding been varnished?" The colleague wasn't sure, so he licked it and replied, based on the taste, "It's varnished." After being licked, that skull was 100% contaminated. In fact, you don't even have to lick it, just touching it or breathing on it can contaminate a sample. Therefore, the DNA we extract from it might not be from an ancient human at all, but modern DNA from an unknown source. To sum up this section, scientists currently have only about 5,000 prehistoric human fossils. While these fragmented remains provide a lot of information, many details are still just guesswork. We can also use genetics to study human history. While genetic research generally supports the out of Africa theory, it frequently encounters counter-evidence. More importantly, the ancient genetic samples we collect face a constant risk of contamination. Alright, we've now covered the winding path scientists have taken to explore the Earth, life, and humanity, as well as the unique style of the book A Short History of Nearly Everything. You should now have a deep understanding of it. Let me summarize for you one more time. First, we discussed how scientists measured the size and age of the Earth. Measuring its size required incredible effort, with expeditions venturing deep into Peru and far to the north to finally determine the Earth's dimensions and shape. Measuring its age was even more challenging. Early methods were largely unreliable. It wasn't until 19th century physicists discovered radioactive elements that humanity could use the concept of half-life to determine the Earth's approximate age. Second, we explored scientists' investigation of life on Earth. Our understanding of ancient life relies mainly on fossils, but their formation and discovery are full of chance, and interpretations are often mistaken. As for the planet's existing life, our knowledge remains poor. We not only don't know the total number of species, but our current classification systems are also in disarray. Finally, we talked about how scientists study human history, primarily through two means: fossils and genetics. On the fossil front, the material is scarce and fragmented, leaving many questions to speculation. While the genetic approach is more advanced and generally supports the out of Africa theory, it often runs into unexplained exceptions, and the risk of contamination in ancient genetic samples always looms. Congratulations, you've just finished another book.